In my last Chabura, I discussed David and Michal. David HaMelech, King David, and Michal, the daughter of Shaul HaMelech, daughter of King Saul, who was David's first wife. And I went into discussion of Sneas and so forth. A person asked me, who attended that Chabura, she actually made a suggestion to me. She said, listen, she enjoyed the Chabura, and I believe it's available on KosherTube. We did tape it, that Chabura on David and Michal. And this woman came over to me and asked me, or said to me, Rabbi, I really enjoyed it, but your discussion was on Sneas, Sneas, modesty, or as I translated, gracefulness, and which is fine, but you advertised it that you're going to talk about David and Michal, about King David and Michal. And if you were going to discuss Sneas, I wish you would have said, she said to me, I wish you would have said the topic is Sneas. And she said, I'd love to come back to another Chabura where you actually discuss David and Michal, their characters, who they are. And I said to her, when I study Chumash, Tanach, I study the Bible, I don't ever really do character investigations, classic literary analysis, as we found in literature or whatever. I don't do character analysis. To me, when I read the story of David and Michal, I'm looking for its hashkafa meaning, its point in philosophy. So therefore, I'm not going to really do a talk on the characters of David and Michal. I'm going to talk about what the stories as they're presented in the Tanach teach me in terms of philosophy. And then I said to her, that's because, it's not just because of a standard I'm taking that I always learn hashkafa or philosophy or halacha, certain aspects of Jewish law, from my analysis of the Tanakh. It's also because I don't think there's any way from the study of Tanakh to have any idea about the actual historical figures, such as David HaMelech or Michal. And I think that's a very important statement, because a lot of people, when they study Tanakh, they have a perception that they are trying to get to know the person mentioned in the Tanakh. David, Michal, Elimelech, Ruth, and Naomi in the upcoming book of Ruth that we'll read on Shavuot. Any of the great historical individuals in the Chumash, Avraham Avinu, Yitzchak Avinu, Yaakov Avinu. I don't think we could ever really fully gain an understanding of their characters. And I'm not getting into the debate that exists. I've heard quoted the debate between, let's say, Rosh Shmuel Hirsch and Rav Aaron Kotler on the fact of whether we can look at these saintly individuals in human terms. That's another argument. There's an argument of whether it's appropriate to apply human nature, the perception of human nature, to these great historical figures. This centers around a statement of the Ramban by Avraham Avinu, where Avraham Avinu went down to Egypt. Ramban, Nachmandi states, Hecht chata Avraham Avinu b'shogeg. Says that Avraham Avinu did a great sin unintentionally. And there's a lot of challenge about this. How can you say Avraham Avinu, the tzaddik, Avraham Avinu did a sin? I mean, it's mind-boggling. So Rav Shimshon Hirsch writes something very powerful. He writes that, in his comment, he says, this is what the Ramban says, and that tells us the approach that we have towards our historical figures. That we look at them as human beings, and therefore it's possible for them to make mistakes. But the fact is, we are to look at them as human beings, we should understand them as human beings, and so forth. Then Rosh Hashanah goes on to say, but in this case, he says the Ramban's wrong. The truth is Avraham Avinu going down to Egypt was not a Chet Gadol. So he says, in general, I agree with your principle, but I disagree in this specific case. Rav Aaron Kotler took Rav Aaron Kotler took issue with this perception, because Rav Aaron Kotler was very adamant that it's incorrect to apply the normal frailties of human nature to these great individuals. Now, obviously, even when we talk in terms of the human nature, we're talking human nature of gedolim and tzaddikim, of great human beings, but we see them still as human. We see a connection that patterns itself around a love connection between Yaakov and Rachel. But the fact is, other people are very adamant. No, you can't apply the constructs of human nature to the individuals. That's not what I'm talking about over here. Although I favor Shimshon position, but the fact is that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm saying that even attempting to understand, in whatever fashion, the true historical nature of the people in Tanakh is, from my perspective, an impossibility. And it's impossible for two reasons, or actually more than two reasons. The first thing is we don't have enough information. Now, for sure, we don't have enough written information from the written text. That's for sure. And it's very important to recognize the Jewish view of the written text, the Torah view of the written text. It's not that we have a Torah Shebechtav, a written text, and then Torah Shebal Peh, which is the interpretation of the written text. No. This is again stated by Shimshon V'Harish and Mishpatim, is that the essential revelation of Judaism, of Torah Judaism, is the oral tradition, is the Torah Shebal Peh. It just so happens that HaKadosh Baruch Hu instructed Moshe Rabbeinu to write down certain notes on the lecture. The lecture, the oral presentation of the Torah Shebal Peh, that's the essential revelation. That's the essential Torah. And throughout history, what we learn from Torah Shebal Peh, that's the essential tradition of our religion through the Tanach and so forth. But at some point in time, with Moshe Rabbeinu in terms of the Torah, but later on with the Nevi'im, HaKadosh Baruch Hu directed them to write down notes on the essential lecture, the presentation of the oral tradition of the Torah Shebal Peh. Given that, it's very important to understand that what we have written aren't just that, notes. But they are very, very concise. They're supposed to remind us of the broader lecture, broader issues. So when we say, not to do malacha on Shabbos, we are to learn that, okay, this is the Torah's way of referring it to all the lessons about the Lamatet Malachos, the 39 categories of forbidden labor on Shabbat. That is the way with everything. So whenever we hear a story, we have to understand that the Torah Shebechtav is written in such a way that it is just notes on the Torah Shebal Peh. But the Torah Shebal Peh itself is very hard to work it through to really understand historical characters. First of all, it's often the case that the connection between the Torah Shebal Peh and the Torah Shebechtav is not very neat. What I mean by that is that it doesn't seem to dovetail perfectly. There are certain statements in Torah Shebechtav that doesn't seem to really point to the exact lesson of Torah Shebal Peh, or the idea of Torah Shebal Peh. I want to give a classic example of this in terms of understanding this relationship of Torah Shebal Peh and Torah Shebechtav. The idea of, let's say, the story of Tzipora and Miriam and Moshe Rabbeinu, when Miriam speaks to Aaron about Moshe al Dvar HaKushit, about the Cushite woman that Moshe took. And that's what the verse says. In fact, I remember seeing some secular author, some British author, talking about Moshe Rabbeinu and how about Moses and how he took this black woman as a concubine. And I got very upset. That's what the verse actually says. Advar HaKushita Shelakach. The fact is Chazal says that's not what it means. It doesn't mean a black woman that he just took as a second wife, although there are a couple Meforshim who learn it that way, because they say that's shot in the pasuk. That's a whole different issue. But most people follow Chazal, and Chazal say it means that Moshe is separated from Tzipora, and Miriam's statement was Al-Dvar Kushit, about the beautiful wife. Kushit, Rashi says over there, the beautiful wife that he took as a wife years ago, that now he's separated from, i.e. he basically is celibate with and does not live as a man and wife, and it's not fair to the wife, and it's not right, and so forth. That was Miriam's complaint according to Chazal. The point is how do you reconcile Torah Shebechtav and Torah Sheba'al Peh? So most people out there, what they want to do is to say, hey, it was a written text, and the rabbis came around and they interpreted it. They played games with it. They made this shifting around and so forth around. They played games with it. That's the way most secularists out there understand it. But that's not the way we look at it. We look at the Torah Sheba'al Peh is what is the essential tradition. Torah Sheba'al Peh is, he said, it's the truth. So why is it the verse is written that way? Why is it that God gave over the lecture and then he said, and write down the note this way? Write down the notes this way. Notice how I said it. Write down the notes this way. And the question Meforshim ask, is why did God write it that way? Why did God command Moshe to write it that way? That's the Torah way of looking at the question. But the essential statement is in Torah Sheba'al Peh. That's one issue. But the truth is, if you look at Torah Sheba'al Peh itself, the various midrashim, they themselves are hard to understand. So in terms of trying to understand the character of an individual and so forth, you have the text versus the midrashim. Then you look at the midrashim and they're contradictory. They're filled with so much difficulty in understanding them and so forth. And then throw into this the further idea that we don't understand the social historical context of so much of these statements. We're trying to understand the history, the character. The fact is we don't understand the context. And I'm not talking about it just from a secular historical perspective. Do we understand what it means to have nevuah? Do we understand that type of closeness to a Kodesh Baruch Hu? Someone asked me a question about Karbanos once. A person said, what do you mean? When the base Midrash is going to be rebuilt in the Zman of Mashiach, someone asked me, are they actually going to bring sacrifices? We're actually going to kill animals again and bring sacrifices? Sounds, something I'm not interested in. And the person pointed to me, what about the Rambam? The Rambam says we've moved away from sacrifices through prayer. Yet the Rambam, the Moreh Nevuchim, does say that. He seems to imply that prayer is higher than sacrifices, and sacrifices was only offered by Kodesh Baruch Hu at Har Sinai, and eventually with the purpose of weaning the Jews away from sacrifices, the way of relating to God. That's the Rambam's famous viewpoint in the Moreh Nevuchim, which the Ramban is very upset with. But the fact is the Rambam in Halacha and the Yad HaChazaka Paskins with the Zman of Mashiach, they'll be the building of the Beis HaMikdash with sacrifices. So someone asked me, what does it mean? So you know what I said to the person? I said, when Mashiach comes and I existentially experience sacrifices, then I can comment on that question. Right now, you come up to me and say, what do you mean with the building of the Beis Midrash we're going to have sacrifices? How's that? What are you talking about? We're going to have sacrifices. How's that possible? What are you talking about? Because doesn't it sound weird that we're going to kill animals again, and the Beis Midrash is going to be a big shecht house with blood flowing? A person doesn't understand that. That is not what I expect from a spiritual place of Beis Hamikdash. So what I said to the person is, he said, I can't comment because I don't understand sacrifices. I don't understand for sure karbanos, Torah karbanos. I don't understand nevuah. So many aspects of the understanding of the world of Tanach, I don't understand. I once wrote an article called "Who's on First?" It was patterned after the article. "Who's on First?" It was some type of statement or recognition of the famous Abbott and Costello comic routine, "Who's on First?" When Abbott says, "Who's on first?" I don't know. I pick up. I don't know. A ball is hit the third base. I don't know. Picks it up. Throws it to what? What? Throws it to who? Double play. So Costello says, that's the first thing you said here that makes any sense. The guy says, I don't understand what I said. The truth of the matter is if you try to understand Tanakh, the basic idea is all like who's on first. You understand that? People living for 150 years? Do you understand the Yibum? Coming up again in this week's in the reading of Ruth on Shvut, Yibum? Do you think we understand it? Understand this concept? And Ruth's desire to be Misyave in order to get married again through this process, in order to fulfill this commitment to her first husband. Tremendous. But what are you talking about? Do we have to understand this societally, in terms of history? We don't understand. So the truth is, when this person said to me, I'd like to know about the character of the individuals. Basically said, I can't. To understand who David HaMelech really was, who he really was as a flesh and blood individual, as a remarkable tzaddik that he was, to understand his character as a human being in terms of historically, the real person, we don't know. And for sure, the purpose of Tanach and the Midrashim on Tanach is not to teach us some of the story or some of the personality of David HaMelech, or Bathsheba, or Ruth. This is not a storybook. It's not intended to tell us of their characters. These individuals existed, and they did remarkable things. But the Torah's point is not just to tell us what these things did. Torah's point is to tell us hashkafa, halacha, what we can learn from their behavior, that was transmitted through Torah Shebechtav and Torah Shebal Peh, in the way that it's transmitted, and it's transmitted in a way that demands of us to think and analyze, not a simplistic rendition of a story, but a story that has different sides to it, different perceptions of it, even stories that seem contradictions, that are midrashim, that are sometimes in conflict, it seems. The point is, what do we learn from it? What do we learn from it? So that's why I said to this woman, will you tell me, when I said I was going to give a class on David and Michal, I wasn't interested in giving a class on the characters of David and Michal. I have no idea. To try and fathom what David and Michal was like, I have no idea. However, from the story about David and Michal, the story of their relationship, the stories that we're told about these individuals, there's a lesson in it that I can pull out. Not a simplistic lesson, but a very deep lesson. A lesson that reflects the depth of the human personality in certain ways. The fact is human beings are full of contradictions. Well, the lessons of Torah come forth, not from simplistic statements, from the presentation of ideas within a context of events, with the complexity of the various aspects of the events, so that we can pull out ideas and thoughts and directives so that we know what to do into the future. That's the point of learning Tanach. It's not a storybook. It's not literature. The whole point of learning Tanach is to understand what lesson I can learn from not just the presentation of the text alone. You have to understand that texts are just the crib notes. They're just the notes of the lecture, from the presentations of the midrashim, and the oral tradition that comes with the text, and the understanding of why the text was the way that God wanted the oral tradition to be written down. And when you work through those complexities, begin to understand the objective is, I will not understand the history as a historian does. I will not understand it as a person who studies literature. I will understand it as a source book for how I'm supposed to live, for ideas and practices that I'm to follow. That's what Tanakh is about. So when I say I'm going to study David and Michal, it means I want to figure out the philosophy I can learn from what is presented around the story of David and Michal. In the future, it's the same issue with the book of Ruth that's coming up in Shavuot, and I know that this tape is coming up before Shavuot. I'm referring to the book of Ruth, and I hope to bring out some aspects of the book of Ruth. Fact is from the book of Ruth, it also is to tell us what is a philosophy. We're not there to study who Ruth was, the actual personality. We're to understand what the lessons are from this event that HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Shmuel to make sure that he wrote down